Well, welcome back and thanks for staying with us here on Morning Live. The Incarceration Nations Network, or INN, is a global coalition for justice and prison reform. Now, the aim of the organization is to support former prisoners back into society after serving their prison terms. And yesterday, the INN, in partnership with the Robben Island Museum, launched a new campaign called Ban the Box. And the campaign, which was launched in South Africa, is a global call to corporates, agencies and businesses to pledge their commitment by giving prisoners a chance in the workplace. Now, joining us virtually for this conversation, our founder and executive director of Incarceration Nations Network, Dr. Baz Dreisinger, and the Nations Network team leader for South Africa, Mthetheleli Ngxeke. Thank you so much to both of you, Dr. Dreisinger and Mthetheleli, for speaking to us here on Morning Live.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
So, Dr. Baz, if I could start with you, just start by telling us a little bit more about, Ban the Box and the project that was launched yesterday.
Sure. So Incarceration Nations Network, or INN, we're a global network of prison reformers and justice reimaginers with a host of different projects. We have 124 partners all over the world doing various things to bring us to safer communities and smarter justice. And one of the arenas that many of our partners work in, including some of our partners here in South Africa, is the space of reintegration post-prison, which is a global crisis. People coming home from prison without access to opportunities, to jobs, to housing, being discriminated against at every turn, facing stigma at every turn. And so one of our global initiatives involves connecting our partners who are doing this work in different parts of the world, including our partners here in South Africa, to push for proper reintegration support when people come home from prison.
Now, Dr. Baz, as a frequent visitor to South Africa, you've launched quite a few programs here, and we'll talk about those in a little while. But as a frequent visitor, I would imagine that you are au fait with some of the challenges that the nation faces. And one of them is an extremely high unemployment rate. So how do you address with these agencies, with the potential employers, this question of assisting with reintegrating prisoners into society by affording them jobs against a backdrop of people who would say they are law-abiding citizens and can't find employment?
Well, I think, first of all, the crisis of reintegration looks radically similar from country to country, whether it's South Africa, Southeast Asia, or South America. As for jobs, we need to recognize that reintegrating people is critical for keeping us all safe. This is not only about serving others per se, it's about serving all of us. And so it behooves us all, and that includes all South Africans, for those who are coming out of prison and facing perhaps the most radical instability of anyone in society, to be reintegrated and to be employed. The idea that somehow someone coming out of prison is a lesser employee is also not borne by the facts. There are actually studies that were done in the US about how those coming out of prison make even better employees, show a level of commitment and loyalty, have experienced loss of freedom, and thus are quite eager to reintegrate and to show themselves as the individuals that they are. So while we need to be concerned about jobs for everyone, certainly, and yes, that is a crisis across the board, we do need to prioritize this if indeed our justice systems, globally speaking, and in South Africa, are moving us toward justice.
Now, Mthetheleli, if you would just briefly share with us your own experience as an ex-offender coming back into a community, what was the reception like, and how's it been since?
Thank you for this question. One of the things that I'd love to first say is that we are coming back from the society being already stigmatized, being already excluded from activities, especially economic activities that will help us to be part of the community. So those are the one things. And the other things is that you don't get just stigmatized by the community, but you also get stigmatized by the working environment. Now, if you are not empowered economically, and then what else are you going to do? It's kind of like you have been pushed into the corner. So from time to time, like the programs that I've been doing, it was been programs to help guys to find jobs. But most of the times they cannot find jobs because of their criminal record. So coming out from that environment, the first fear is place to stay. And the second fear that you have, it's what you are going to eat and what you are going to wear. So all of these three problems, these are the immediate problems that you need to be confronted with in order for you to be integrated properly into the community, of which those are part of my problems. But luckily for me, I came out to a halfway house, and then I find a job, through an organization that was working with us in prison. So from that, it's been 7 years working for that organization until I resigned. So all in all is that we need to be helping people that are coming out of prison to be also economically involved. So that's the one thing. And also another thing is also how we are using the language, the media, like at INN, we always say that we need to move away from dehumanizing language. The media is playing a very powerful role. We need to be moving towards a language that humanizes the person, like to refrain from using words such as ex-offenders, because in one way or the other, we are all offenders. We've done some wrong on one way or the other, maybe in smaller than a bigger scale. And also the second one is dare to change, to sensationalize the life in prison as if it's a movie, to try to face things as they are, in the reality. So, with that being said, the media can play a powerful role as well in terms of helping people who are coming out of prison and reintegrate them well into the community.
So, Mthetheleli, with regard to the use of language that you speak about, so as you say, we shouldn't use terms like ex-offender. How should we refer to those who come out of prison?
Yes, the best language, ma'am, it will be like formal incarcerated. I don't have the right words. It will be formal incarcerated. That's what we choose to use at INN instead of all returning citizens, because at the end of the day, we are dealing with human beings, so words have power to create, So when you talk about ex-offenders and ex-prisoners, it feels like prison and prisoners, like prisoners are walls into the prison, but the reality is that it's humans, and then they're just on the journey. We're all on the journey in this life. They're just on the journey, and their journey happens to end up in prison. That doesn't mean that it's their destination to be labeled with, because journey still continues as long as somebody's still alive.
Dr. Baz, just coming back, as I had indicated we would earlier, to some of the programs that you have undertaken here in South Africa. Let's speak to those and also, what you found and what the successes have been.
So I'm proud to be the co-founder of one of the prison to college pipeline initiatives here in South Africa. It's called the Ubuntu Learning Community. It's a collaboration between Braunfley Correctional Facility and Stellenbosch University that involves bringing university students into prison to learn alongside incarcerated students. One of our big mottos at INN is education, not incarceration. And so many of our partners are engaged in this sort of work. The Ubuntu Learning Community is doing incredibly powerful work, not only dispelling stereotypes among university students as they go into prison and discover that these individuals behind bars are brilliant, powerful leaders and not simply the, quote, criminals that they imagine them to be. And it's also offering access to networks and, of course, to educational opportunities for individuals who are in prison. And there is loads and loads of data showing us from around the world. It's not even something one can argue about anymore. It's just a fact that those who are offered educational opportunities in prison are not only far less likely to go back to prison when they come home, but also very, very likely to thrive and live the lives that they should have been offered offered access to in the first place.
So
last night, I should also add that we are also launching an initiative specifically around reintegration that is a global initiative with a piece of it here in South Africa. And that involves a massive campaign that addresses discriminatory hiring practices for those coming out of prison. In the US and other parts of the world, this is called Ban the Box. And the box refers to the tick box that one must check on an application that almost immediately excludes one from the possibility of getting a job. So it is a campaign around Ban the Box. It involves engagement with corporates around hiring practices and other kinds of potentially strategic litigation around discriminatory hiring practices. And it also involves support for entrepreneurial skills, entrepreneurial development, so that individuals can launch their own businesses. So we are actually supporting the launch of 8 businesses, small businesses around the world in collaboration with our local partners, including one of our local partners here in South Africa, here in Cape Town, to microfinance some businesses that are run by people coming home from prison. And so last night at the V&A waterfront, we collaboratively launched the coffee trailer that is part of our project, which is called The Writing on the Wall as Enterprise, in collaboration with The Message, which is one of our South African partners.
So all of this sounds great. There is, of course, always a question, Dr. Baz, around those who are less responsive to rehabilitation. You think about pedophiles, for example, and in South Africa, unfortunately, we've seen in the last while, especially, a lot of killings of children by people who had been released from the system, either on parole or they were out on bail or the like. And how do you address the public when it comes to that kind of situation? You know, because it's difficult. The sexual offences register perhaps not taken as seriously as it should be. But how do we deal with situations such as those?
Well, I think we have to start with the fact that the system is already not working. The recidivism rates here in South Africa, like the rest of the world, again, South Africa is not unique in this respect, are astronomical. So it is already not working. And so we have to say, how do we address this so that it does start to work? And once you start from the perspective of we already have a crisis, we have a crisis of reintegration, we have a crisis of things that are entities that are called departments of corrections that are not actually doing much correcting, then we have to step back and say, okay, how do we afford people opportunities such that they won't commit crime in the first place? And if they do, and if they're subjected to a Department of Corrections, that when they return home, they have opportunities. And likewise, they have opportunities while they're incarcerated. We talk a lot about this concept of rehabilitation, but we don't see that much of it in so many departments of corrections around the world. And so once we recognize that this corrections entity is not doing the work it's supposed to do already based on these recidivism rates, then we say, okay, how do we do this smarter and better? And that involves the kind of programs that our partners do. We don't come in and impose programs. We work with partners who are already on the ground all over the world, and we work to support and amplify and connect them with each other and with the world.
And perhaps just as a final thought, Mthetheleli, what kind of reforms do you think are needed in our criminal justice system in South Africa in order to facilitate these programs?
So one of them is the reintegration, like for parolees. When guys are coming out of prison, they tend to be put under a very strict measurement of parole, of which it does not really help for them to be able to find jobs, you know, and to be able to work. So with that being said, you understand, we need to relook of how the parole system is organizing itself in terms of helping the people that are coming out of prison. And the second one, it's the process of restorative justice. You know, the restorative justice, it needs not to be working backwards. It's supposed to be working frontwards. What do I mean about that? Is that when you are having two people that have fought and then they didn't agree on something, instead of being the justice system being at the front, but the client or the victim being in the forefront to have to understand why the perpetrator has done what he has done, to understand. So this process of healing, as the process of the court is going, it's not the court at the front calls the victim at the end of the trial, but the court calls the victim and the perpetrator all integrating, having some conversations while the trial is going. So that can also help in terms of bringing the healing in our communities.
Well, we have to leave it there, but thank you so much to both of you. A very interesting conversation, and maybe one that can be expanded upon here on Morning Live at a later stage. But thanks to founder and executive director of Incarceration Nations Network, Dr. Baz Dreisinger, and Nations Network team leader for South Africa, Mthetheleli Ngxeke. They were talking about the crisis of post-prison integration for ex-offenders coming back into communities and the workplace.